screens, it's a plot to drop the IQ. Fighting amongst each other over rumors that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood wands of holly. Suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempted mental robbery, executed sloppily. The hypocrisy, this mockery, and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the Akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful. Friends, welcome to Rogue Ways here on Gnostic TV, where I love to bring you all of my work. I'm Lindsay Sharman. I am a spiritual teacher and healer, a guide. I am a channeler of the spiritual ancestors. I'm an author of many books, some of them channeled from the spiritual ancestors, like The Key of Transformational Healing. I am a past life reader, a tarot reader, a sound healer, and more. All of what I do you can find on rogueways.org. I love to teach people one-on-one. I work in group settings. I do events, all kinds of things there. I also create very powerful orgone accumulators that you can keep with you at all times. Here is an example of one, actually. They are Lotus votives as well as powerful orgone accumulators. They're one of a kind each, literally because I make them one by one, but also because I've never met anyone else who makes orgone like me. So that's very powerful. So if you would like to see any of that, you can go to rogueways.org and find everything I do, including my shows that are not on Gnostic TV and that are everywhere podcasts are served and on multiple video platforms. All my spiritual content is here. So if this is what you love, you're in a good place. If you would like to also see my political or social commentary or my dives into various scientific and philosophical arenas, then you're welcome to go find Rogue Ways elsewhere as well. So today we're talking about the universal signs, the signs where the universe is talking to you, where your higher self is talking to you, where your spiritual guides and allies are talking to you, where you're receiving the signs or you're receiving the communications. And we're just going to talk about how those things come through for most people and what to take from them. And we're especially going to focus on some of what is called angel numbers or these repeating numbers, because that's the most common way that most people get some of these signs from their higher self or from their spiritual guides and allies. So we're going to focus in on some of those numbers and what they might mean. So let's jump into it, because this is fascinating. And, you know, one thing I love to help people understand is that everybody is connected. No, there's nobody who's walking around disconnected. And I know there's a whole very popular thing to consider that there are NPCs or non-playable characters or people who don't have the divine spark or people who don't have the fire of life within them. And, you know, very famous people have said this before, and I wish they were a little bit more careful, because what is actually true is that there are people who, you know, their flame is really, 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 really low, and it's almost not even on anymore. And that's actually one of the biggest problems in our world today. When I work with people spiritually, it's the most common problem I see is our divine flame is very low. So there's that, right? Or there's people who are just unconscious. You've been there. I've been there. We've all been there. It's part of our path, actually, to ascendance. By the way, I have a course in Gnostic TV's course section on ascendance, on how to wake yourself up more and more, and the specific tools you can use to do so. So it's very worthy of your time, and go check that out. But everybody's doing that. Everybody's on their way. And there's nobody who is not of divine nature. There's nobody who's not on their way back home, you know, back to reunification with God. There's nobody who doesn't have this connection. So whoever told you otherwise doesn't really understand. They saw something and they misinterpreted it, or they've been misled. There is no bit of the universe that is not consciously God, or unconsciously God, I should say sometimes. So you have this skill to communicate with your higher self, with your spiritual guides and allies, with God, with the universe. Everyone does. The more awake you are, the easier it is. The more you've worked on yourself and gone within and really attuned yourself to these things, the easier it is. But you can be a total newbie. You can be a total beginner. You can be someone who really feels like you don't know and aren't connected, and you can still use these methods or start to understand how they work in your life. So I'm excited to do this. Let's talk more about it. We're going to start with synchronicities. And this is one of my favorite topics, both because I live my life synchromistically. Synchronicities are often the things that tell me what to do next and how to do it, or just really strong confirmation I'm on the right path. Most of the things we're going to be talking today are more that type of message of like confirmation that you're on the right path, you're doing it well, you're going, you're making progress. The universe likes to remind you you're doing well, everything's good, keep going, right? Celebrate you and cheer you on. And synchronicities are one of the ways that can happen. And what I like to differentiate is between kind of like simple coincidence and synchronicity. And so, simple coincidence, it still could be meaningful, but a lot of people take things like this and they blow them up, I think, a little bit out of proportion. Um, so, one example is somebody, was talking about how they had this synchronicity that they went down to visit a new country and there was a picture of a dolphin somewhere and they had always loved dolphins. So they knew it was a message that they should move there. And I'll say it could be. It really depends more about the moment and the feeling and like the energy that came through and like how it struck you. Did your, hairs rise up on the back of your neck? Were you like shook by it? Was it very impactful? Because if so, then it can be that simple. But a lot of times I think people are sort of trained to look for synchronicities because they're trying to feel or be spiritual. And trying is where we almost always fail in our spiritual gifts and our ability to interpret messages and receive them. Excuse me again. They're not, we don't need to look for them. Right? We don't need to try. And when we do look and we do try to find them, we're almost always fooling ourselves. And by almost always, I mean 99.99% of the time. So if you're doing that, just know you're probably leading yourself astray. You're probably creating something out of nothing, and you don't need to. You can actually just let go of trying to. You can ask for the signs. You can ask God, truth, love, beauty, the universe, whatever you identify as this source energy that is good, true, and beautiful in all things. You can ask that in your own words to give you these communications, and it will happen. You can trust that. You don't have to then go looking. You can just wait for them to appear. So I don't think we need to stretch to find synchronicities. Sometimes they're undeniable. And sometimes they do just shake you. Right, you're just deeply affected by it. And so I'll share just a couple examples of really powerful synchronicities that are definitely worth paying attention to. You could ignore them if you tried. And so these are both from my own experience. And one is this image you see next to you. This is the Vesica Pisces. And there's many esoteric, beautiful, we could do a whole episode just on the Vesica Pisces and the different aspects of it, what it could mean in all of its dimensions. But what happened with this image was so funny. I was talking to this person, and he was my teacher for a moment. I was his teacher back. We're often each other's teachers. It's not always a teacher-student thing. Sometimes it's a teacher-teacher, student-student thing. So this is kind of like that. Pretty profound, though. We just found each other randomly online, and we just started having really profound synchronicities and really profound messages were coming through both of us for the other person, and we were both just realizing so much. And this is one of the beautiful things about finding a person you really can catalyze some of this progress with. And so this was definitely happening in this friendship and this teacher student relationship. And at one point, he was kind of hard to understand. He just didn't, it was like not quite just like clear English in the traditional sort of way. And a lot of really intelligent people are like this, by the way. So I was kind of always like interpreting and translating what was actually happening and what was actually being said. And so sometimes I was just like, is it me? Am I not getting it? This is just so confusing. And he was saying, like, that thing, I can't think of the name. It's like, and he described everything I would have never described the Vesica Pisces with. Like, I just was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he was like, man, this is going to frustrate me, but I'll figure out what it's called, or I'll remember it, or I'll find it, and I'll just send it to you. So, we'll get there. And I was like, cool. We were, talking and, left that conversation, literally went on Instagram or Facebook, I don't know, some social media. And this is the first image I saw, and it just hit me. And I was like, that is gorgeous. You can see these 2 points like eyes. And at first I had thought it was this really symbolic impressionist sort of owl. right? You can see what I'm seeing, these two big eyes, like this owl, and like his sort of beak maybe or something in the center there. And that struck me first, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And then I sort of saw how both were reverberating out, and they had this sort of wavelength coming out from each of them, and I was like, that's even cooler. And then I saw how those two things reverberating into each other were manifesting that lattice like energy in the middle there. And then I realized that center point was this like, third transcendent thing. And I was just getting all these like downloads and information from this image. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. And I was like, I have to send it to him. I bet he's going to love this. So I screenshotted it and I sent it to him. And he said, yeah, exactly that. And I was like, what exactly that? And he was like, that's the thing. And I was like, what thing? And he's like, that's the thing I was trying to describe to you just like 4 minutes ago. I was like, what? How how would that happen, right? So that's a synchronicity. That's the sort of thing where it's like there's no reason. It doesn't even make sense. It's out of nowhere and it's hitting on multiple levels at once. That's a synchronicity. And synchronicities like that, or even more intense, have happened to me where I start to then, really understand that reality is not what we think it is. And time is a strange, strange thing that is not linear, and perception is everything. And that any message can come through at any moment, actually. And here's just one example. It can even come through electronics and social media and things that are otherwise perhaps looked at as negative, especially by spiritual people in a spiritual community. Messages don't care. In fact, the avenue they come through, they just want to come through. I'll tell another quick one. I was in a peak sort of moment. I was in peak transition. My spiritual journey was at a heightening point, and profound transformation was occurring. And I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts from one of my favorite people, and I was just walking down like a city street. I was walking near a park. So there's like a park, and there's like football, and there's like, there's a lot of people, and there's just activity. And, so there's a lot of things around, which is why this was even possible. But it lasted for an incredible amount of time. And what it was a series of synchronicities. So I just explained to you one synchronicity, right? One idea just so happened to come through in this way. In this example, there's almost endless synchronicity. So as I was walking, the things I was hearing from this podcast began to appear in front of me and around me. And literally to the point where every single, let's say 2 to 3 seconds, one of the words that I was hearing would be in front of me in some way. It would either be the word written out itself, like I would hear, open and see open, which you could do a million places a million times, wouldn't necessarily normally stand out, except then 4 words later, they were saying bluebird, and a bluebird flew right by me, right exactly when they said the word bluebird. And then, 4 seconds later, they said, blonde kid with a football, or something, a blonde kid with a football, like ran by. I mean, I couldn't re-describe it to you in its entirety, but it was exactly like that. And it went on for minutes, 10 minutes, which is a long time. And it just kept going. I actually had to sit down because I was like, maybe if I stop moving, I wonder if this will stop happening. Am I breaking reality? Like, am I about to come out of a coma and be in another dimension as another type of being and be like, that was a crazy coma dream? Oh, what's actually happening, right? The fabric of reality feels like it's dissolving. So I had to sit down, I had to take a seat, and it just kept going. Cars would drive by with the thing that was being described on them, or a person would walk by with the look on their face that was being described in the pot. Like, it just didn't stop. So that's a series of synchronicities. And I call those synchro trains. And I don't know that anyone else has ever called it anything, because I've never heard anyone describe anything like it before. That's not the only time that's happened to me. And people, I think, sometimes call some similar experiences to this deja vu. And if you have deja vu, I would call that a sort of synchronicity, but it's more like from your dream precognitive or premonitory self than it is from anything else. So super interesting. So these are synchronicities. This is one way the universe talks to you. Your guides talk to you, and other things like that. I'll give one more example. There's a combination sort of a premonitory dream and a synchronicity. I had a dream. I didn't remember the dream even. I usually write my dreams out. I'm very into my dreams. I have a lot of detail in them, and I gain a lot of insight and information from my dreams themselves. I actually teach dream walking. So if that's something you're interested in, you can go to rogueways.org and check that out. But I didn't actually remember this particular point of the dream until partway through the day, which I'm sure has happened to you before too. And in this instance, I was at a sort of spiritual fair. And in this moment, I found a booth and this man at the booth, and I just was drawn to him sort of for really no reason at all. He's like the least enticing, least flashy sort of booth at the whole event. And but that maybe that's why I was drawn to him. So I walked over to him, and then right behind him was this book. And when I saw it, I went, oh, and kind of like shook, because as soon as I saw it, I remembered I had seen that exact cover in my dream just the night before. And he said, what? And I was like, oh, nothing. Because it just felt too weird, even at a spiritual event, to explain. I just saw that cover and I just had this dream, and I remembered that I had dreamt exactly, and I've never seen this cover in my life that I know of. This book I don't think is very common. It's this book called Peace at Last. It's about John Lennon coming back from the afterlife, which again, I wouldn't have normally believed. He's like too famous of a person to, just for some random person to have him come back to him and then write a book about it. It just seems a little bit unbelievable. I'm a skeptical person, even as much as I've experienced the profound. So I was kind of like, I'm not going to explain all that. And he's like, no, tell me, what is it? And I was like, oh, it's just that book behind you. It's so weird. I dreamt of that exact cover last night, and I don't think I've ever seen it before. And he's like, oh, it's for you. And I was like, no, I don't really want to buy anything. I'm walked here. I don't really want to carry a bunch of stuff home. Thank you so much. And he's like, no, it's free. Just take it. And I was like, why? And he's like, oh, I was told to bring it for someone, and it's obviously you. And I was like, oh. So he's more tapped in than I was, especially at that time. And more things have happened in that same day with that same man that are much more profound than that, actually. But that was pretty big synchronicity, right? There's a little bit of premonitory dream, a little bit of synchronicity, a little bit of both. So your dreams are another way which you're being communicated to all of the time by your guides, your allies, your angels, your higher self, all of it. And that's why I love teaching dream walking. And again, if you're interested in learning more about that, we can work together. Go to rogueways.org. But synchronicities, dreams, these are one way in which you are communicated with. Another way is actually by like nature itself, you might say. And this is one of my other favorite ones. I call them all my favorite, I'm sure, because they're all great. And they're all methods I've used at various points in my life, some more than others at different points. And now I'm sort of just in this collective. They all work together, and they all help inform me and bring the messages through, remind me that I'm on the right track. And maybe this one happens too. This one's, I'm not going to say it's somewhat common, but in the spiritual community, there's a lot of people this happens to. And this is the feather example of nature communicating with you. And a lot of ways of thinking about this call it like the bird people are communicating with you. And that's often true. If you are a person who receives the nature communication via feathers more so than any other method, then you're strongly connected with birds, bird energy, bird people, if you want to call it that, the spirit of the bird, if you want to go that direction. And that energy is a high level energy, and it's a beautiful energy. It's part of what connects us to God, to source. It's our intermediary, right? Birds, they fly up into the sky, they fly back down to the earth. They're messengers. So their feathers are often messages for those who they call to. If you notice them and pick them up, or have always felt like you wanted to pick them up but don't because you're afraid of germs, by the way, it's pretty much a myth. You can pretty much pick up feathers and be just fine, but you do you. But if you're one of those people, then this is you. This is one of the ways you get messages. Sometimes it's heavy. So, sometimes every time I go outside, there's just feathers. Everywhere I go, there's feathers. I get out of my car in a parking lot, there's a feather. Like, it's just, this is not even, couldn't be chance, right? But even in the moments where it seems like it's just singular and unitary, it's still not chance, right? Again, the logical mind will say, of course, it's chance, but this is one of the ways that you and your higher self have arranged for you to receive a message, is that you'll notice the feather. How come no one else did? How come no one else picked it up? I like, again, I get that there's a lot of people who would just be like, why would I pick up a feather? That's weird. Right? But if you're in tune and in touch, then this is one of the ways that it's coming through to you. Not everybody gets the feather, however, right? A lot of people will instead use nature as a way to receive messages intentionally. So the feather is kind of like you're walking around, you're moving, it's coming to you almost, right? Some of these other ways are like you could go looking for the communication. And again, all of these are just signs that you're on the right track, that you're loved, that you're supported, that you're guided, right? That whatever the question you're asking in that moment, or whatever the thought you have in that moment, or that feeling you have in that moment is being affirmed. So this is what I tell people too, to start to notice, what were you thinking about? What were you focused on? What were you looking for in the moment? That's probably what the feather is connected with. And by probably, I mean certainly. So the more we are aware of ourselves and our thoughts, the easier it is to understand what the message is. Right? For example, you're sitting there, you're stressing out over like, do I move or do I not move? Is it best to move? Is it best to not move? And then in the moment you're imagining like, it might be really cool if I move, and maybe it'll be a new opportunity or whatever. And then you see the feather. Well, then the feather is definitely affirming, like, yeah, if you're just thinking about moving and that was a question in your mind, then this is a reinforcement of the answer that yes, that would be a good choice for you. You'll have others. It's never going to just be one feather is the thing, but they can be helpful. They can be this guidance, this connection, this message. But again, some people go out, they go looking for the message, and this is where nature can also be a communicator in many ways. So I would say if you're going to try to use this method, to go out and be as solitary as possible in a space that's natural as possible. So there's some trees, and there's a possibility that animals would be passing through or in the distance somewhere, and maybe there's some water running and things like this. And then you can kind of choose which aspects you would like to interact with. And what I always try to tell people is, try to get into the active mode and the divine will within yourself, and choose to receive a communication in the way that you want. It's not as passive as you think. A lot of people are like, well, I'm waiting and I want to, but I just don't notice, or I just don't get it. And like you got to kind of switch your attitude a little bit and say, like, of course I'll be responded to if I ask for an answer, right? And I would always start with a sort of yes no structure. And so here's an example. You're sitting out in this natural place and you say, okay, God, if I need to do this and it's a yes, then have the wind kind of come up and brush my hair, or something, like go across my face or something. And if the answer is no, like, let it be still. And I'm going to ask, and then I'll just wait like a few seconds and I'll just see what happens. So then okay, I'm asking, does the wind react? Did it not? Well, there's your answer. You can try also, I'm going to watch the water. I'm going to watch the water as it goes by. Every once in a while, it'll like splash in this certain way. So I'm going to say, okay, if the answer is yes, like have that splash come. I'm going to ask, look for it. Okay. Again, the window should be short. You shouldn't ask the question over and over and over again. You should trust that because you asked for it, you received the answer. If there was no wind or there was no splash, the answer was no, right? Another is you could have like a leaf or something fly across your field of vision. You could have an animal pop up all of a sudden or fly across your field of vision, right? A little chipmunk might come up and look at you and then run away again. I mean, God is very capable of working through nature. That's what nature is. It's just another version of God. So, right? So just trust that. And feel free to ask. And maybe you'll see a feather, and maybe you'll pick it up, or maybe it'll be a pine cone, or maybe it'll just be that you weren't really necessarily looking for anything, but you were walking in something so random that doesn't necessarily belong in that place at all. You've never seen before in this way, just so happened to be on your path. Maybe it's not a feather. Maybe it's a man-made object. Well, maybe that is part of your message or your sign. So you can also do this in a little bit more extended time period instead of sitting down somewhere and asking and answering and getting these natural sort of responses. You can also say, I'm going to go for a walk. And if I'm supposed to know something, like throw it into my path, like make it happen. Thank you. We're always doing this in gratitude and love, but you're allowed to ask for it and know that you will receive what you've asked for. All right, so that's animals, nature, the wind, the elements are able to bring you these messages too, and you can use that intentionally and request it and receive it. A little bit more intense for some people and maybe a little bit too far for some people. This is another way that is really beautiful, and this is interacting with what I'm going to call star beings. This is like one of the most common ways of describing these intelligences. I come from various Native American traditions and teachers, and so one of these are called Wogies, which is a fun name. So sometimes I call them the Wogies, Wogi, Wogies, and I also channel some of them, and I call them the spiritual ancestors, or they've asked me to call them the spiritual ancestors. And this is a group of ascended masters who can appear as lights or light beings. And they are not contained by time or space, so they can seem to be moving across vast distances very quickly and in ways that physical ships wouldn't be able to do, and that's part of how they interact. And they can make flashes and sort of sprinkles of lights across the sky and all sorts of phenomenon. And some people interact with them and think they're UFOs. You're welcome to think that if you want. It doesn't matter to me. But a lot of people interact with them and notice that they are psychic, and they are. They're responding to your thoughts, and they're responding to your feelings. And therefore, if you went out into the night sky and you were going to look up and try to interact in this way with these beings, I would say that if you have fear, especially if you have a lot of fear, that it's probably not going to be as successful because they know you're afraid and they don't want to harm you. Don't want to make you feel fear. It's okay to be generally a little bit nervous and a little bit, right? We just have that. That's okay. But if you're just like, then you really don't want to. And so they're probably not going to come. So just know that. A lot of people think you need to be in a certain location, like a place of power, or with a certain person who is like able to call them. And, those things help. They're definitely more likely to be really active in those types of situations, but they're not required. Anyone, anywhere, anytime can actually interact with these aspects of higher consciousness. And so the night sky is also just convenient. They can also come in the day. You can see them in the day. You can have lights and flashes and things in the day too, but at night it's easier to see. So it's just a convenient backdrop. And so you can do the same sort of thing as if you were going to go out into nature and ask for and receive messages. You can look up at the night sky and say, hey, whatever's good, true, and beautiful, whatever's love, whatever's of the, universal highest cosmic consciousness, God, source, again, whatever you like to call these things, maybe you just want to say, hey, can you say hi? And maybe you'll see a sort of flash and a sparkle. And you can start to sort of interact if you want to. You can ask questions and do whatever you want. Again, some people don't feel comfortable with this. They're not quite sure who or what those beings are. And so I always suggest, again, if you're not sure, if you feel like it might be negative or you're just fearful about it, like, don't do it. Because nobody's needs to. You don't have to do this. You just can. You can. And so I just like to let people know, like, you can. You don't have to have a special person with you to do it. I do call them for people, and they do come for people who want to see them when I'm around. I interacted with them my whole life, and I see them most times I am outside, actually. And so, there are people who have relationships with them, and then maybe it's like easier, or like I said, maybe they'll come kind of in more brilliance or something, but there's no special requirement. They're not like, oh, not you. You're not good enough. Nope, we're not going to do it for you. You can do it. So I like to open it up for people and let them know that you're capable of this. And I also like to let you know, like, you don't have to do it if it's scary. Like, there's no reason. They're not going to look down on you, and no one's going to judge you if you don't do this. So night sky is best. You can do that same process where you just kind of get still and get grateful and have some love, and then just ask and just see what comes through. So a lot of times people will, again, the flashes and all the things I described, but a lot of times they'll just be a slightly moving light It'll look almost otherwise like a star or something else, like same size, same intensity of light, but it will just move and it will just be very subtle. And so you can ask it like move left if you want to tell me this, move right if you want to tell me that, blink red or blink green. And so there's not a lot of action, but there is direct communication happening. So you can also try that. Look for those types. There's all types, there's all kinds. And it's not because they're actually different types of beings. It's just they're just acting in different ways. It's really usually it's whatever works best for you is the way that they're going to present themselves. So so there's that. That's a really fun one. It's a really high level one too. And it's again, I think that's why a lot of people think like they can't do it on their own. But you can. So always able to connect with these things. So try this out. This up, by the way, is just a picture of the moon. It's a picture to remind me of to talk about this with you. Night sky, light. It's cool. The moon has a consciousness too. You're welcome to talk to the moon. Another way that we are communicated to, and this is more often by our higher self, who is like trying to guide us and trying to scream through 20 layers of distraction to like get our attention. And so I just have this picture of me that someone took with tons of consciousnesses around me trying to protect me, get my attention, and help me. And sometimes you can catch these things with a camera, and sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's just dust, and sometimes it's not. So you can usually tell the difference. And this is one of those where you can tell the difference. You can see if you count just many tens of different consciousnesses. So when this is happening, when your highest self or various aspects, and sometimes it's your ancestors and sometimes it's your spiritual guides, are trying to get your attention, you will just think of something. So, and everyone's different. Some people have the ability to smell messages. So it'll smell a certain way all of a sudden, and they'll realize their attention is being asked for and they're receiving a message. Some people will literally hear it as though someone's talking out loud into their ear. And sometimes, more often for more people, you will receive impressions. And sometimes these impressions come through in the suddenly you're just like singing a song to yourself. You haven't heard it recently. It's not playing somewhere in the distance. Like it's just suddenly in your head. And you're just like, why, what? This song's in my head, right? It's kind of insistent, or it's kind of loud, or it's just sudden, or I just noticed it all of a sudden. Well, I would stop, right? And I would think like, what are the lyrics of the song? Or what's the part that I'm hearing in my mind, right? What's the part that my attention's being drawn to? There's usually a message right there. This is not true if you were just like at a club or you were just listening to music and you're just singing a song that you just heard recently. It's not necessarily true. It's almost never true, in fact, in that case. This is much more often if you just suddenly are feeling this, you're suddenly aware that there's this song and you haven't heard it recently, right? There's a message there almost every time. So it's the out of the blueness. It's the sort of doesn't fit necessarily with your experience otherwise that gets you to notice this type of message that again is being shouted to you through multiple layers. And it's just an easy way to get your attention. They're like, oh, this song's somewhere in her head. Like, let's pull that forward. And the same is true if you're all of a sudden just remembering. So suddenly there's just a scene of your memory playing out in your mind, right? And it's like, again, it's somewhat disjoint. It's not really connected to what you thought you were doing or what you were just doing before this or what you were going to do after this. It's right. It's a little bit out of sync with some of that. And you could just again ask yourself, like, why am I suddenly remembering this? Why is this in my mind right now? And there's always a message there, right? And usually it's like, hey, you're about to go into a situation that is going to make you feel a lot like this memory did. Or hey, remember what you learned from that moment that this memory is referring to? Remember the lesson there? Like you're going to want to remember that right now. Right? Or right? Or it's a warning, it's a suggestion, it's just some guidance. And that's why it's coming back to mind. You're being triggered to remember it because it's easy, because it's already in your mind, and because it can get you to this point where you remember, oh, yeah, I know that. Or, oh, yeah, I remember that. Oh, okay, I know how to go through this situation, or I know what to watch out for in this moment. So those are really good messages too. And these come again, sudden songs, memories, just like a sudden thought that's really clear and doesn't seem necessarily like it came from, again, anywhere sensible. those you really want to pay attention to, like, why am I thinking this right now? Why is this in my mind right now? Why am I, sort of focused on this right now? And I will again emphasize that if you're trying to do that, it's not actually the same thing as just suddenly becoming aware. Oh, this is in my mind all of a sudden. Why? Right? And the investigation is the important part. The noticing of it and the investigation is the important part to say, like, what is this actually about? What could I be being shown or told in this? So that's another way, right? Again, these beings are all around us. Sometimes you can see them, like in this picture. And our higher self is also always here with us, and they're always trying to communicate with us. The more we are still, present, calm, and noticing what we're thinking, feeling, and being, the more likely it is for these messages to come through accurately. So there's one more way the universe is always speaking to you. You have this skill too, of course. Another way is it seems bad. Catastrophes or negative things happen, or all of a sudden plans fall apart, or what we really thought we were working hard for just is like not going to work out. Or in this case, for me, of this picture you're seeing, I had to leave my dream home. And I thought, "This is so unlucky, it's so awful, it's so unfair." I had worked my whole life, and I finally had this property. You can see here I was on a river, it was beautiful, luscious, and green. Across from me was hundreds of acres of national forest, so nobody anywhere. On the one side of me was a Shinto shrine, it just had the brightest energy, it was so beautiful. We had all these natural all of these big, I'm gonna say Sasquatch because, it's true and, it's fun, but we also had, like, bobcats, and we had, bear, and we just had it was beautiful, it was amazing, it was very rural. My next nearest neighbor couldn't even see the house, our properties were so spaced apart. It was just my dream, right? I started growing food and everything, I had my cute house, and I had this river. It was excellent. Um and then all of a sudden I had to leave that house, for various reasons. I was like, if it was just one of them, it might have been okay, but it was not just one thing, it was multiple things. My life was actually threatened by people who were stalking me. There was a sexual predator house across the street that I didn't know of when I moved in. Which is probably where the stalker came from. There was a lot of drug addicts that lived in the forest right up the road, which is just, dangerous and unsafe for anybody. Those things, maybe I could have stayed even then. But then my health was also affected because I found out there was arsenic on the property, and there was just all kinds of things. And I was like, how could this beautiful, perfect location end up being so bad? So I felt really bad. I felt like my life, had experienced this catastrophe and it was unfair and all these things. And then I left there. I didn't want to. I just knew I had to. I knew I had to go. I couldn't stay in this place anymore, and it broke my heart. Um, and I left. And on leaving, I began to heal a lot of things I didn't even know I had. In fact, my PTSD, I didn't know I had PTSD until then because I was so traumatized by this stalker and by being in danger and by all the trouble I was facing that I started to have flashbacks, and I'd actually always had them. I just didn't know. And so, but it triggered me to then try to figure out what was going on. And then I got help for that. And then I ended up healing all this trauma I didn't know I had. And then I ended up healing from PTSD, which I didn't know you could do. And then I realized I had never actually been in love with my husband, and we divorced and all of these things. And I ended up really being able to let go of my old life that I was very attached to. It was my identity, it was who I was, right? It was everything I ever worked for, it was my whole life. And I was able to let go of all of it because of this one little piece here started to fall apart, and so did everything else. And I just realized, oh, this isn't actually who I am. It's not actually my purpose. And this isn't actually my life. There's actually something else. And so I went looking for it. And then I found this. I'd always done tarot, and I'd always kind of done healing, and I'd always had profound spiritual things. I'd always been psychic and all this stuff, but I wasn't doing that stuff. It was just sort of a thing that existed in my life. It was very separate from my profession, from my everything. But because all of that fell apart, I was able to realize it's because I was supposed to be doing something else. And here I am, and this is now my business. I'm the president and CEO of Rogue Soul Co. I work with people one-on-one, I work with people in groups, I do events, I write, I do all these things, and that's what I was supposed to be doing all along. I mean, and not really. I was supposed to be doing what I did until I did this, but what felt like a catastrophe, what felt like a problem in my path, what felt like an unfair punishment was actually the best way to get me to my highest flourishing, my highest outcome, my highest potential, and to get me to live in service as I always had been, but in a much more authentic and profound way. And so even catastrophe is a message to us. And I just more and more am able to take it that way. If the car breaks down, like we weren't supposed to go. If the TV breaks, like we weren't supposed to watch TV, or like it just that's just the way it is. And it doesn't mean you don't fight for things or that you don't overcome problems. Sometimes that is the message in the lesson too. And sometimes it's that you were prevented from going a direction that did not actually serve you. And so you learn to be grateful even for these things. So that's another way the universe talks to you, right? It's not just synchronicities, it's not just the animals and the nature, it's not just the star beings and the wogies in the sky. It's not just the things that suddenly appear in your mind strongly and call your attention to something. It is also the things that happen to you that even seem bad, catastrophes themselves, preventing you from doing what you weren't best served by doing. And so now we'll get to the meat, the nitty-gritty. Let's see if we can make this a little bit bigger for you guys here. And these are just the repeating numbers. These are like the easiest. These are the most common. These are actually the ones that are usually what wakes people up a little bit more. If you talk to enough people, and maybe you're one of them who come to the sort of spiritual path or come looking for deeper spiritual information or people content and all of that, this is what started happening to them is they just started seeing repeating numbers all the time, and they had to just go like, what is this? Right? It gets your attention, and that's the point of the message, is to get your attention. So there's repeating numbers, and we all see them, and some of us more than others, and they can have meanings. I will tell you this first and foremost: the meaning is yours. No one gets to tell you what the meaning is. And there's a million people who want to, and most of them are egotistical enough to know for sure that they're right. So watch out for them and go within yourself instead. And then if you're like me and you would like a handy guide that is a nice place to at least start from before you determine what the meaning is for yourself, then you can use this or any other guide that resonates with you. Again, I would go towards what actually makes sense to you. When you read the meaning, or when I'm about to share with you some of these meanings, if they hit you and you're like, yeah, I do think that's what I feel when I see this number, then go with that. And if not, go look for a different one. Don't change from day to day, right? Just go with what you feel that meaning is for you. And here's why. I could say to you, for example, this symbol means this. And that could be a truth, and it could be true of that symbol. It could be generally true of that symbol. It can be true of that symbol in many, many times and places, even many different traditions and mythologies. And then it can also have a different aspect that is more hidden or more occulted, or one that people just don't talk about as often. And that can be the aspect that is trying to come through to you, right? Or let's take it even more personally. Let's go towards dream analysis for a second, for example. I teach this all the time, like I said, and this is how I teach dream analysis too, is you can go to the dream analysis book or the dream dictionary and you can look up, what does a bear mean, right? And it'll tell you. And you'll start to see after time, like these things are actually somewhat obvious. If you think about like what a bear is known for, it's like hibernating and, these sorts of things, and maybe some ferocity, mama bear, we say, right? And so those are going to be some of the things it represents. But if you're someone who was traumatized by bears in your life and you hate them, then a bear in your dream is not going to mean the same thing as a bear in my dream. I don't have a problem with bears and I love them. So your symbols are going to be unique to you in some way because your allies, your guides, your spiritual ancestors, your higher self knows how to talk to you, right? So just like all the other things we've been talking about, what's really important is what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and how it's coming through to you. No one else can really tell you what something means except you. There's people who are very intuitive like myself, psychic like myself, and they can help and we can bring messages through for you even. And in the end, you have to be the ultimate arbiter of what is true for you. which also is, we can delude ourselves too. So it's important to learn your own possible self delusions and know yourself really well to get that message clearly. But so again, I'm going to share some of these with you. These are what the numbers mean for me. And it seems pretty universal. And, if you take a syncretic view of all of the traditions around the world, a lot of these are pretty reinforced in a lot of those. But again, always bring it back to yourself. What do you think? So number one, if you're seeing 111, 1111, and these repeating ones, this is really about unity. Unity is the number one, right? There's only one, the one true source, the one true God, the unity of all things. So unity is the information that's coming through that number. But that can also therefore be like you're in alignment with that unity. You're in alignment with that highest good, right? You're in alignment with that. This is just straight up confirmation. And this is usually, again, the number that most people are seeing, 111. And that's part of why it's sort of like, oh, welcome to the party. You're here, you're back online, right? You're in alignment with that one universal truth. So one is pretty cool in that way. We've got 222 or twos, repeating twos. And this is usually a message that's more about your relationships. It can be a romantic relationship, a really close friend. It can be family. So you'll know which relationship, if that's what's being called attention to. Again, two, there's two of something, relational, division, duality. So relational, usually, or interacting with others is going to be part of that. A three, the angel number 3 is perfect manifestation. This is pretty true. Again, it's pretty universal. The Holy Trinity, for example. So it's a perfect manifestation. So, if you get in the 333, it might be like, hey, you're manifesting really well. Like, keep your mind positive, keep focused on the prize. Like, you're bringing into fruition the things that you're working towards. 4, repeating 4s are usually about a cycle coming to an end. You've sort of fulfilled something and you're about to then start a new cycle. That can mean a lot of things. There's a lot of cycles, right? It can be, just a stage of your life. It can be like the end of something you've been doing for a long time, maybe a career, maybe a relationship. It can be all sorts of things, but it's sort of that sign of like, all right, you're finishing up. About time soon to be moving on, which brings us to 5, which is usually transformation, travel, sometimes big changes, sometimes upheaval. So again, that thing I just described of having to leave that property and find this new life and rediscover myself in all these ways, that would have been a 5 period of time. I probably saw a lot of 5s at that time. And so 5 is a sort of natural progression from 4, not just because it literally comes after, but because you can see how 4, if that cycle is ending, you're about to go through some transformation, right? 6, repeating 6s, pretty uncommon. Up until now, some of those are a little bit more common. 1 and 3 repeating are the most common in my experience, and then we get more and more rare as we go. And 6, almost no one gets. 6s, repeating 6s are harder. You can imagine the clock doesn't go there, for example. We don't have 666 as a time possibility. So it is just harder to receive in general. There's less opportunities for 6 to repeat itself. So you can still see it. It can be on a license plate. It can be anywhere that numbers are, right? So it can still come to you and it's just more rare. You'll notice it if you notice it more than once. If you just are, again, if you're looking and you're like, oh, there's a repeating number, like that's not really a message. That's just you finding patterns. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not the same as like you're going through life and all of a sudden it strikes you. Oh, look, there's this, right? And these numbers will happen more than once as well. So if you're not sure what the message was, just see if it repeats more than once. See if you see 666 or 6666 again and again. It's not negative, by the way. And you might take it that way, but it's not like the number of the beast. It's not, demons or Satan or anything. That's a whole other thing. Again, we could do a whole show just on 666. But what it really is it's matter. And that's not what's on this chart, but matter is hard. Being incarnated is hard. Dealing with slow material, all of this and this body over all these years is difficult. I don't want to project that onto you, but that is the general consensus is there's challenges in being alive and being in material reality. when we are off in dreamland, or we're off astral traveling, or we're in between lives, like, it's not hard. There's no suffering. So, there's a little bit of this. So the message is usually, hey, there's a challenge here. You got to be disciplined. You got to take care of yourself. You got to have some self-awareness, and just, don't fear. Don't like close up, but just like notice and be aware and be really intentional. So that's usually kind of a warning, 666, but not in that way where it's saying this is evil or bad or run away. Just saying like, all right, buckle down, right? Time to go. It's go time. 7, repeating 7s again, more rare even. And that's the perfect number. 7 is perfection. 7 is divine totality in many ways. It's perfection beyond knowing or understanding, or it's divine grace. So this is a high level energy that's coming through. It's usually coming through to tell you like you're being protected, you're being divinely guided. This is a very powerful moment, right? God is with you. I mean, it's an intense energy, and it just gets more intense from there. We have 8s. Repeating 8s is pretty perfect as well, but it's more about reciprocity. Your good karma is going to come through with these repeating 8s. Like, it's time for your perfect fulfillment, fulfilling your purpose, even divine purpose. So 8s, repeating 8s are very high level, and 9 almost non-existent. Very rare to have repeating 9s, more so than any other number, to the point where it's quite possibly never going to happen to you in this life. So don't be sad. But 9 is very rare. It's often you're having a direct Kundalini awakening, or a spiritual awakening, or a very profound spiritual experience in that moment or soon thereafter, or having just come out of one. So pretty rare. And it's a higher level of self coming into being and alignment. So that's all those numbers, right? You can have 10, 10, 11, 11, 12, 12, but we get into other territories there. So we're just going to move on and sort of wrap things up here, because those are, I should say, the methods by which you are communicated with. There can be more for you, or that don't really seem to fall under any of these, but the similarity in all of them is going to be that it strikes you with an impact, calls your attention, and you can feel that something is happening more than just a random event. So pay attention to those messages. That's what guides you. That's how you know. And you know yourself more and more as you do this. And you also know God more and more as you do this. You carry that with you as you go, and your whole life can change in ways that feel miraculous and seem miraculous. And if you would like any support with any of this, then you can find me at rogueways.org. I love to support people on their path. I love to teach people. I can meet you wherever you're at. You can be just brand new or pretty advanced, and we can still get to the next step or the next level together. That's what I do. I do past life tarot readings. I do sound healing, and all of this stuff is at rogueways.org. You can also read my channeled messages as they come out. So I speak with the spiritual ancestors when I channel through their messages, and that is at rogueways.substack.com. It's like a little publication. You just subscribe and you get updates, and you can choose to have them emailed to you, or you can just choose to leave it there in the Substack app and come read it whenever you at your leisure, whatever you choose. So go there, and you can do it for free. I have free articles and I have free messages that come through for people. And you can also support what I do, my mission and this work, and get those channel messages in full as well. So both free and paid subscriptions at rogueways.substack.com. I'd love to have you there either way. And Lightning Oracle Tuesdays, I'd love to invite you to specifically, because that is when you get a message much more clearly than any of the ways we just talked about from your spiritual guides and allies. And it is quite affordable. And so if you can get in on one of those Tuesdays, every first and third Tuesday, I do this for a group of people. It's also a profound field. And so you're actually healing and releasing and transforming just by being there. And then you also get that message, which is very powerful. So quite affordable. It's the most affordable thing I do. It's $10 a time. So I would hope you come and join us at some point and see for yourself. And all of that is at rogueways.org, or you can go straight to the booking site, which is what you get to through rogueways.org to book any of those services or events. you can just go straight there at calendly.com/rogueways. So if you want to go there, you can just choose from any of those services. Again, I support people spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, all of the above, and with very specific services as well as those events. So I'd love to see you one-on-one or in a group event. And thank you for being here and being you. Thank you for receiving these messages. The more you do, the more we all do. Thank you for letting them heal and transform you. The more you heal yourself, the more you heal all of the world. And be good, true, and beautiful. And until you do, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.
Glued to them screens, it's a plot to drop the IQ. Fighting amongst each other over rumors that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood wands of holly. Suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempt a mental robbery, executed sloppily. The pomp proceed as mockery and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the Akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet.